I'd never seen a sky that colour. Yellowy, black, greeny, purple. It was uncanny.
Oh, it was a day and a night that we shall never, ever forget. A most eerie day.
I couldn't believe that this was happening. First the sky, and then this horrible smell, really sulphury smell. And then the clouds open.
Thunder and lightning, and it was horrible.
The skies had warned of what was to come, and by 7 o'clock on the evening of August the 15th, 1952, they began to fulfill their promise. By midnight, more than 9 inches of rain had lashed the already sodden hills of Exmoor. The East and West Lynn rivers became swirling, ruddy-brown torrents. Finally, their banks gave way, and thousands of tons of water, rock and boulders thundered down from the moors onto the picturesque village of Lynmouth and washed much of it into the sea. When the sun rose, it was like a scene from the Blitz. 35 people are known to have died. The world was stunned by the devastation. How could Mother Nature have wreaked such damage? Local historian Tim Prosser showed me how that night, 49 years ago, transformed the landscape.
Well, we're standing here in the harbour. Opposite us is the Lynmouth Flood Memorial Hall, where the lifeboat house had stood, and the area to the left is where the beach hotel stood. There was a row of 10 cottages right on the apex of a bend, and the flood wiped them completely from the face of the earth.
It won't be allowed to happen again. A river widening scheme and a new floodplain will make sure of that, but it's too late for some.
I take it you're not Didda Singleton. Hello, do you mean Didda Singleton? Mike Thompson from Radio 4 did it.
Get down, Morg.
Didda Singleton lost 6 members of her family. She takes me to the spot where her home used to stand before the flood. All that remains is a small memorial garden, 30 feet above the river.
This used to be our house here.
Didda points to a tiny bathroom window set high above us in a surviving cottage next door.
That river came up as high as that. Dad went to open it and the river came in the bathroom to meet him, which frightened him to death. That's when he said, "Come on, we're getting out." He said, "I'm not staying here a minute longer." That was the only time I saw my dad really cry.
Out of terror?
Yeah, I think so. I think he really was frightened. Frightened he's going to lose us all.
He lost many. One of the local shops was made into a morgue as the sea started to return its dead.
One of the cousins was down on the butcher slab in Lynmouth. My gran and everybody was all around the coastline. They've still not found David at all yet. Mum had to identify him, which knocked Mum for 6, because she had to remember what things to look for. Now, my gran had a big wart on her back because she hadn't got no head or arms or legs when they found her, and Mum identified her by this huge wart on her back.
Not everybody lost family, but all in this small community lost friends. I gave one of the survivors of that terrible night, trainee electrician Ray Davey, a list of those who died. Almost his entire life was on it.
I knew Ada Barwick, Elsie Bowen, Kenneth Bowen. I knew Charles H. Litson, who we called Harry. He was our local taxi driver.
Following the disaster, aid poured in. A major rebuilding programme promised to fully restore local landmarks, brick by brick. But Jenny Windsor, then 16, remembers being warned that some things can't be rebuilt.
Uncle came in one morning and said to us, "Hart's gone out of the village. Hart's gone out of the village," and we really didn't understand what he meant, but we do now. The village has changed totally.
But Ray Davey did manage to hang on to some rather soiled pieces of the past.
I got some old photographs that still have the Lynmouth flood mod on them. Yeah,
Oh yes, it's all over these
yeah.
photographs and papers, isn't it?
There's my mother in the garden with my sister. Me as a young lad.
Looks like it would have been almost impossible to get this amount of mud totally off the photographs.
Sickly, horrible mud.
This is God done this, I said, and nobody could have done anything about it.
When the floodwaters finally subsided, most shared Dillis's view, but not all. One rumour in particular began to circulate. Ray first heard it from Jack Clapp, a respected local shopkeeper who he used to go fishing with. Jack knew the area like the back of his hand, having spent years peddling around the moor as a delivery boy.
There was big talk of spraying clouds and whatever to bring rain. It's quite feasible.
There is indeed mounting evidence that seeding clouds or artificially stimulating them to rain is feasible. For several decades now, scientists have been conducting such experiments, with some claiming a great deal of success. Most involve firing particles of salt, dry ice or silver iodide into clouds, either from an aeroplane or from the ground. The idea is to give water vapour in the cloud something to grow on until it becomes big enough and heavy enough to fall as rain. But Dr. Giles Harrison, a meteorologist from Reading University who studied the Lynmouth flood, is highly sceptical. He's convinced that the disaster can be blamed entirely on natural causes.
Coming down that valley, there can be quite a torrent, and I think actually the name Lynmouth comes from the Anglo-Saxon for torrent. It is a town on a torrent. In the case in 1952, 15th of August, there was a lot of thundery activity. So Exmoor was waterlogged, and there was a depression on the 15th of August. A lot of rain fell. This runs down, it collects debris. There are a lot of bridges on the East and West Lynns. I think 29 bridges were wrecked that night. So I think a lot of natural factors conspiring, leading to a terrible tragedy at the bottom.
In short, we should discount any talk of rain-making. And to make that even clearer, the Meteorological Office sent us this statement.
A look through the information held at the National Met Library suggests that the Met Office started some experiments in cloud seeding during the spring of 1955. However, the experiments did not prove particularly successful, and no experiments in weather modification, as it's known, have been carried out for many years.
So there's no doubt about it. Rain-making experiments didn't even start until another 3 years after the flood. But that conflicts with what this man, then a trainee soldier, recalls.
In 1950, middle of 1950, I was a young private soldier in the Devonshire Regiment on Salisbury Plain. And overhead on a brilliant summer, there were planes always around, spotter planes, they were called Osters, I think, but all sorts of small aircraft. But it was generally accepted, I think the sergeants told us, the officers didn't talk to the privates, that these were actually seeding the clouds and trying to create rain.
Tony Speller, who later became the Conservative MP for North Devon, thought little more about it until, more than 30 years later, he had a visit from a rather agitated member of his constituency. It was our Lynmouth shopkeeper, Jack Clapp.
And he said, everyone knows here this was caused by those aeroplanes dropping something in the clouds and making rain. And of course they'll never admit it, because if the government admits it, they'll have to pay compensation to people like me. That's his phrase. And so I did start looking, but I started off probably disbelieving. I mean, it seemed ridiculous. You throw some handfuls of dry ice, I think it's called, into clouds, and you get something like Lynmouth. No, it's just not possible. And I checked. The Air Ministry knew nothing. Ministry of Agriculture knew nothing. Meteorological Office knew nothing. Well, actually, the phrase they would all use was, nothing to do with us. And eventually I had an anonymous phone call to Parliament. And the voice said, you Mr. Speller, yes. And it said, well, you're looking in the wrong way. You're looking in the wrong place. And that voice said it was Agriculture and Meteorological Office. It wouldn't give me a name. It was what I would call a very ordinary London clerical voice of that time, who either wanted the truth to come out or didn't like the chaps who'd been talking to me.
And the main advice he gave you was you should be looking at
back at agriculture, yes.
With the Ministry of Agriculture
and
the Air Force.
And the Air Force, yes. And the essence of it was that there were papers for everything happening, that sort of work, for every year except the years we were looking at. So on I went, but I could never, ever, this is the sad part, I could never find anything of any consequence. except the fact that papers were clearly missing from some of the ears.
So the papers we need to find out more are missing. But what about the people? Could anyone who took part in such experiments, assuming they did happen, be still alive? Squadron leader Len Otley is very much with us and clearly recalls a special rain-making mission over northern England in 1949.
Well, we called it Operation Witch Doctor, but that wasn't exactly a formal title. It was purely a little joke to call it that, Operation Witch Doctor.
Why was it called that?
Because witch doctors make rain. But John Hart, the other flight commander on the squadron, who was also involved, he may have other information on this.
I have my logbook in front of me, and the date of this particular flight was the 3rd of August 1949. Time of takeoff 1700, aircraft type Wellington, registration letter was D for dog, pilot's name Flight Lieutenant Otley, duty was a special duty, and the remarks, seeding dry ice into cumulus cloud to produce rain. This was successful, and the time of flight was 50 minutes.
So what happened from the moment you spotted that cloud?
From the moment we spotted the right-looking cloud, we flew straight through the top of the cloud, and at the appropriate moment where we were in the middle of the top of the cloud, gave the signal to the operator. He pulled the cord and down went the dry ice into the cloud. We then flew out of the cloud, around it, and we waited down at the bottom of the cloud to see whether any rain in fact came out, and it did, about 30 minutes later, and everybody cheered.
Group Captain John Hart. So, despite claims by the Met Office that no cloud seeding experiments took place until 3 years after the Lynmouth flood, we now have firm evidence that they were actually going on several years before the disaster. Because our research has revealed there was also military interest in cloud seeding experiments, I now decided to call the Ministry of Defence and ask for clarification. Were cloud seeding experiments taking place before 1955? They sent me this brief statement in reply.
The MOD has not and do not conduct cloud seeding experiments. I trust this settles the matter.
Well, not really.
The details of that flight are open for all to see in the Public Record Office. So I cannot understand how the Ministry of Defence or anybody else will say that these things did not happen. I have the proof. The Public Record Office have the proof. If you don't believe that, I'm sorry.
Group Captain John Hart insists that not only did such experiments take place when he said, but that he's witnessed them work. But was this just a fluke? How reliable are such techniques, and how much rain can they make? Tom Henderson has been cloud seeding in the United States since the 1940s and now runs his own company, which does research for the US government and industry on weather modification. He's in no doubt that cloud seeding technologies are reliable enough to be commercially viable.
There's a hydroelectric power company that we do a project for, have been doing it for about 30 years, and their contention is that if you could increase the water supply through their generators by 0.1%, it would more than pay for the project. So water's valuable.
And not just, it seems, to electricity companies.
Cloud seeding was used to increase rainfall in the Vietnam War, actually, by the military, and with some success by those that were there and did that work. The task being to put a lot of water down and prevent the other guys' trucks from getting where they were headed for because it was too muddy. And,
Project Popeye, I understand that was, wasn't it?
Yeah.
The Ho Chi Minh Trail?
Yeah.
How effective was it in bogging down the Ho Chi Minh Trail from what you've gathered?
Well, it depends on who you talk to. But the American airplane pilots that were actually doing it said it was very successful. And by that, they meant that they seeded some of these clouds and it rained pretty hard. But at the same time, nature was producing a lot of rain around, too, in the area.
So, given the difficulty in separating the forces of nature from those of man, what led Lynmouth's shopkeeper Jack Clapp to suspect that cloud seeding experiments might have helped cause the Lynmouth flood? After a long search, I managed to track down his only child. Cleaver Latham was 10 years old at the time of the flood, and now lives just up the coast in Minehead. I asked her if she could shed any light on what first put cloud seeding into her father's mind. Indeed she could. Cleaver dug out a treasure trove of old letters and papers that had been left there by her father shortly before his death in 1994. On top of the pile was the transcript of a radio talk recorded in 1955. It was called "The Day We Made It Rain."
This is the BBC Home Service. In the summer of 1952, Alan Yates took part in an experiment to produce rain. Mr. Yates.
I was reminded of the day when a friend said to me, "We want you to go and sit in a cloud this afternoon while we try to make it rain." I agreed, and later that day, rain was pouring from the cloud while I sat in the middle of it, a mile above the earth. This is how it happened.
Alan Yates, who sadly died earlier this year, was a senior lecturer at Cranfield College of Aeronautics. He'd been asked by a team of international scientists to conduct cloud seeding experiments. The programme describes how a team of observers watched from the ground as he threw salt from a glider in an attempt to make the clouds rain. And when was this? Mid-August 1952, within days of the Lynmouth flood. Did it work? Well, Alan certainly thought so.
There was no disguising the fact that the seedsman had said he'd make it rain, and he did. The combined enterprise had attracted a lot of attention from meteorologists, and the general public were interested in rainmaking. The BBC television unit had visited us to make a film and to explain the probable advantages to the world of a controlled rainfall. The film was to be shown a few days later, and we look forward to seeing ourselves on the screen. The day before the programme was due, the rain fell with unprecedented vigour and washed Lynmouth into the sea. The programme about the scientists who knew all about controlling the rain was quietly abandoned.
Abandoned documentaries, secret memos, pilots' logbooks. We felt we'd gathered enough evidence to return to our sceptical meteorologists. The following is taken from the minutes of an Air Ministry meeting held in the War Office in 1953 to discuss increasing rain and snow by artificial means.
Possible uses. A. To increase rainfall over a given target area in order to bog down enemy movement in that area. B. To explode an atomic weapon in a seeded storm system or cloud. This would produce a far wider area of radioactive contamination than in a normal atomic explosion.
The minutes go on to say that seeding carried out from the ground is capable of creating rain up to 300 miles away. So even experiments carried out as far away as London or Yorkshire could have influenced the weather over Lynmouth. Our meteorologist pondered over these papers carefully.
I suppose it's alarming when you have an area of science that you know something about and you see that there are documents which are top secret.
Very, very cautiously, Giles Harrison conceded that if there was cloud seeding going on as early as 1952, either from aircraft or fired from burners on the ground, it may have contributed to Exmoor becoming completely saturated in the days before the Lynmouth flood.
Well, if Exmoor was waterlogged, then the runoff into the rivers would have been more rapid. The only possible way I could see that cloud seeding might be implicated would be if some of that waterlogging had occurred for that reason. And if that was something that was influenced by cloud seeding, if silver iodide was used, then there may be some residue of that still.
So, if it was silver iodide that was used to seed the clouds and not dry ice or salt, it would leave a trace in the soil. Could we find it? Might there be traces of it in what Ray Davy called that horrible mud that smeared his old photographs? I rang Barry Smith at the headquarters of the British Geological Survey.
Oh, it's definitely possible. I think basically you would use a scanning electron microscope and you would look for the presence of both silver and iodide, both in the same particle. But it requires some detailed scientific investigation to understand exactly when the silver deposition took place.
Encouraged by this, I asked Dr. Richard Scrivener, also of the British Geological Survey, to collect sediment from Exmoor and send it to Barry for analysis. And we hope to be able to give you his results at the end of this programme. On June the 22nd, 1955, questions were asked in the Commons about who would be financially liable if cloud seeding experiments went wrong. We now know from studying formerly secret documents that this sent both the Air Ministry and the Treasury into a flurry of nervous activity. But the men from the ministries relaxed on getting the advice that it would be almost impossible to prove that such experiments had helped cause a flood. Their optimism came from the United States, where a precedent had already been set in the courts.
On all the cases that I know about, there are two major ones, one in Colorado and one in South Dakota.
Cloud seeding expert Tom Henderson.
There was a flood going on, and the general public immediately jumped to the conclusion that it was caused by the seeding, and I was on committees that studied that. It turned out that the flooding that occurred couldn't have been done by the seeding, because the seeding had been stopped many, many hours before this flooding occurred, or even the rainfall that produced the flooding.
Nonetheless, growing concerns in this area led to the creation of NMOD, otherwise known as the Convention on the Prohibition of Military or any other hostile use of environmental modification techniques. Adopted by the United Nations in 1978, this, as its wordy title suggests, banned military forces from using cloud seeding or any other weather modification techniques for combat purposes. So that must mean that all talk of making war with the weather has stopped. Wrong.
While some segments of society will always be reluctant to examine controversial issues such as weather modification, the tremendous military capabilities that could result from this field are ignored at our own peril.
A major research paper compiled in America in 1996 highlighted all sorts of ideas on how best to harness the rain, wind, sea and sun to devastate an enemy, either by bogging him down with artificial thunderstorms, drowning him with man-made tidal waves, or freezing him by blotting out the sun. The project was called Owning the Weather. Its message, whoever owns the weather owns the world. We tracked it down on the internet.
In the United States, weather modification will likely become a part of national security policy. In this paper, we show that appropriate application of weather modification can provide battle space dominance to a degree never before imagined.
KU Public Affairs, Presnell speaking.
Oh, good morning. I'm calling for Colonel William B. Shields.
Yes, sir. Hold on one moment, please.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
One of the contributors to the research document was Colonel William B. Shields, then at the Air War College. He's now commander of a military college at Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama. I asked him for an interview and was greatly surprised when he accepted, subject to clearance from Washington. This didn't come for several nerve-wracking days. But then, just when I'd virtually given up, word came through that a brief interview would be permitted over the telephone.
Good morning. This is Colonel Shields speaking. How do you hear us?
Good morning, Colonel Shields. Very well indeed. Having leafed through the Colonel's research, it seemed that making rain had become a bit old hat. So I asked him, tongue firmly in cheek, whether he should now try making clouds.
Well, actually, the technology to do that exists today. There's been research that has proven this. One of the things mentioned in our paper has to do with the carbon black, where if you can develop little bits of carbon on a microscopic scale, carbon dust, if you will, you can disperse these with the right conditions, ideally over a body of water necessary to develop the kind of airflow that actually generates clouds and increases the moisture content.
So we already have the technology not only to make it rain, but to make clouds in the first place.
That's correct, yes.
Of course, the US, along with many other governments in the world, has signed the convention that prohibits the military or any hostile use of environmental modification techniques.
Yeah, that's correct. There's a UN treaty that prevents that.
Would that mean, therefore, that you feel all this will never happen?
Certainly that would be a challenge that would have to be overcome. There are some limitations that imposes, but I think over the next 30 years we're probably going to see an environment where those types of legal challenges could eventually be sufficiently and satisfactorily overcome.
And meanwhile, weather manipulation research is not halted by this convention, is it? People are allowed to carry on researching.
That's correct.
There will be those people, of course, who will say all this is playing God with the elements and that we shouldn't be doing it. What do you say to them?
We have the historical example of atomic energy when we split the atom. There have been wonderful things that have come from that, and there have been horrendous things that have come from that. The potential still exists today for us to destroy life on the face of this planet as we know it with that technology. But yet the more rational aspects of our human dynamics have overcome that, to date anyway. But who can predict what the end state will be?
Indeed, who can predict what the end state will be? And it's not just a question for Americans or officials at the UN. The Liberal Democrats' Foreign Affairs spokesman, Mingus Campbell, has expressed concern about Britain's alleged involvement in weather modification experiments and has asked the Prime Minister to reveal what work is currently going on. He was told that the MOD is involved in 2 atmospheric research projects costing around £1 million, as well as several other strictly classified projects that can't be discussed. It may be that the results of our soil sample will reveal once and for all whether man or God is responsible for what happened in Lynmouth. But if that result proves inconclusive and the clouds open on the tragedy's 50th anniversary next year, some locals are bound to ask whether Jack Clapp was right, and they're making it rain again. Ray Davey and Jack's daughter, Cleva Latham.
I think he just wanted the truth, because so many people lost their lives. It destroyed so many families' lives, and even to the time he died, he was still convinced that there was something at the root of this that the general public weren't being told.
Was that rain induced? We don't know. What goes on behind closed doors in this country today? And then? I don't know.
The Day They Made It Rain was written and presented by Mike Thompson. Specialist research for the series is by Helen Weinstein, and the producer was Jane Ray. Soil samples taken from Lynmouth as part of the programme have now been analysed for the cloud-seeding chemical silver iodide, and suggestively silver residues have been found in river sediment, but silver and iodide have not yet been found in the same particle. Sampling was limited by foot and mouth restrictions, but the British Geological Survey say it will carry out more extensive tests over the next 18 months and inform document of its results.